It's the 29th day of September. We're almost in October. Holy cow. Where did the time go? Got a great show for everybody tonight. We're going to be jumping right into the light about Fukushima. A radiation forecast withheld by governments worldwide. That's the reality of it. So you probably remember this headline from last week. This was the batch. We're in the batch number 2 of the legacy headlines that I gathered up recently. I can't remember this. Yeah, we're on batch. We got 5 batches to get through so far, plus all the shows that didn't get done because I was at a commission. Plutonium in fuel rods cause for concern. This was on the 16th of March. This is 5 days after Fukushima tsunami. And on the 16th, all the reactors had blown up at least once, if not multiple times, of the 4 reactors in the 8 fuel pools that melted down. A total of 38 reactor cores plus have been released into the biosphere, the ocean, the ecosystem. And we are in real trouble. And so the cover story is what we're basically covering tonight. So I'm Dana. Welcome, everybody. You can call in at 709-589-4406. And we got a new phone ordered. And this one, I notice now that, I probably mentioned it, but if I pinch the bottom corner, I can get it to hang around for a bit longer than it would the other way. The other way it would just conk out. And this way, when the screen starts going haywire, if I shove down on it. So it'll take a while for that other phone to show up. They're on back order. And it's worded though. I can't wait for that to show up and put a stop to the madness here. About 6% of the fuel rods in reactor 3 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant are made from so-called mixed oxide MOX. It's called plutonium MOX fuel, by the way, which contains plutonium as well as uranium. Well, they all do. Once you go through the chain reaction starts, that's when the plutonium is created. So you put a military grade because they're taking used fuel or nuclear bombs, reclaiming the hot particles like plutonium and uranium-235s, and they're putting that back into a chain reaction. And so it's a breeder reactor when you do that. And so if they can get the science down, which we pray they never will, they'll be able to produce enough plutonium out of a single breeder reactor like the mixed oxide reactor number 3 to fuel, who knows, dozens or even 100 reactor cores, a perpetual machine. These are perpetual machines because they never stop splitting atoms. So after 14 months or so, when you take the fuel out of the reactor core, you put it in a pool to cool down for a couple of days, what they call it. It's not to cool down, it's just it'll melt down if you don't put it underwater. And you can't contain it. You can't put it in a cast because the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the alphas, the X-rays. And what happens is they're splitting atoms, the same amount of atoms you would if you're going to boil water for a million homes and businesses. They're still being produced, but now there's no containment like it was in the reactor core. But the reactor core is not absolute either. It burps huge amounts down into the torus, which is then vented into the building. And it's legal because they can't stop it. Same as in Canada with the CANDU reactors. It's legal to poison everybody within a couple of 100 miles because they can't contain the tritium-3H, right? And the accidents they've had there are just unprecedented. Like some places in America, 15 atoms a liter, 15 becquerels a liter is considered the maximum for tritium. Lake Ontario, the drinking water coming out of there was 44,000 atoms per liter for decades after a major event. But they can't contain it because the tritium from tritiated water just permeates through the stainless steel pipes. And remember, everything is tripled inspected that goes to a nuclear plant. So you're talking about the best of the best, and it still can't contain it. So it's a technology that shouldn't exist, because everything with replicating cells is annihilated by it. Your body doesn't have an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And James Lewis, this is the last day before the contest is over, is today. And so I put a link in there for the sound. I think the link is also under the video. And it's a contest. It's anti-nuclear song. It takes a lot of work to do what he's doing, so we've been promoting it. If you've been around, we've been promoting it since the contest. And away we go again here. Let's keep going here. Let me put it on the big shot screen. The big screen. It was a little bit fast, isn't it? Let me try that again. Coming back in, yeah. I guess that's an okay speed. What other speeds have I got? That's 2 seconds. Let's try 1 second. Yuck. Walk. Hang on. Let me try 15. What is that? 0.15? Oh. I don't like that. I like the 2 second one, actually. Well, it's the same thing. I'm going to digress here, ain't I? Hang on. Let me come back in. The top safety official at the agency pointed out all used nuclear fuel contains plutonium. The minute you start the chain reaction, that is the plutonium, right? And you can never turn that off. And everything, it forms naturally within conventional uranium fuel as uranium bombarded by neutrons. And although plutonium is a long-lived emitter of radiation, it's also quite heavy. So it's not likely to move far downwind from the nuclear meltdowns. That's an incredible statement, isn't it? Because that's the plutonium fallout map. This is based on 26 days. Or 20 days and 21 days in this particular model. So to suggest that it's not going to fall very far downwind, but all the atoms, the isotopes, all the isotopes are the same size. You can put 200 million of them in the head of a needle, you can't see it. And so to suggest that one is heavy so it'll fall closer to the site and won't travel very far, there's a reason they do that, right? Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. Think about that statement right there. And so think about this early plume model, which is based on incomplete data of the inventories that were lost. Toxicity, this study from 1996, toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs and beagle puppies. There's 144 beagle dogs and puppies. You like beagle dogs and puppies? You like puppies? Well, nuclear scientists don't. Death from the radiation occurred 1.5 to 5.4 years after the exposures. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, the liver occurred beginning about 3 years after exposure. Bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. In other words, and liver tumors in 20 dogs were the cause of death in only 2 because they occurred later than the tumors that occurred in the bones and the lungs occurred before the tumors in the liver. And tumors in the 3 organs often occur in the same animal. So typically you would get those 3 particular tumors, the skeleton in your bones or your children's in particular. And the younger you are, the more your producing stem cells because you're developing like insects and birds and mammals and animals. Like anything that's applicable to a human, which is what we're showing you right now, is horrifically applicable to smaller species and small children. These findings in dogs suggest a similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in the humans accidentally exposed to uranium. It's interesting how they phrased that last narrative. This was by Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, and Dr. Raymond Gilmade. He's got 96 studies on beagle dogs and beagle puppies. So, psycho! And he works for the Navy, which is what Loveless... And it's an interesting name for an institution that murders dogs and puppies. The institution's name is Loveless. No irony in that one, is it? All right. Bear with me. And this is the achievements for Dr. Raymond Gilmade, by the way. Very prestigious, very esteemed academic. And he hates beagle dogs and beagle puppies. Okay, so let me recap that. 144 beagle dogs and puppies, they all died of brutal death dying from radiation tumors to your bones is a nasty way to go out of this world. And so these were very cruel experiments. Okay. So there's two more caveats to this one. A biokinetic model of inhaled curium. So once the reactor cores melt down, the reactor is referred to as curium. The biggest byproduct, the curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the radiated nuclear fuel. So once the fuel comes out of the reactor, curium isotopes are the biggest byproduct, which means the farms that are surrounding almost every single nuclear plant are contaminated heavily, not with just plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and everything else, the thousands of other isotopes that are harmful to everything with replicating cells, but curium isotopes. And curium isotopes, interestingly, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium isotopes. And plutonium, as you noticed, killed all the dogs in all the studies. But what's even worse about this is that the dog's kidney is 50 times more efficient than a human kidney at removing the plutonium. So the dog's done 50 times better than a human would. So in Raymond Gilmade, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico study suggesting that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to uranium-238. Let's not talk about 239, which is the most prolific one, by the way, because it's infinitely worse than the 238. The 238 is insidious, obviously. With a 240,000-year lifespan for the 239, that's pretty big concern, too. And so what they done was they totally misrepresent the reality, right? Because the animal's kidneys are 50 times more efficient than a human kidney at removing the plutonium. So a human is 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs, and the dogs all died of horrific, it's a heartbreaking way to die. And that's why I talk about how radiation should be banned in the hospitals, because that's a cruel thing to do to somebody, is irradiate them. Because you might get rid of one tumor, yeah, it might work, but now you're going to get 7, 8, 9, 10 other tumors showing up everywhere. I can take you through all those studies if you want to have a fucking bad night. I'm not going to do it to you tonight. Maybe I will, just to be a bastard at the end of the show, but because I don't like talking about it, and I don't like showing those studies, because it shows you that the journalists and academics hate your guts and everybody else. Is journalist and nuclear scientist just another word for serial killer? Well, sure it is, Dana. There's a small group of people, man, that come to these shows all the time. They're the most educated people on the planet. They're not being hoodwinked by anything anymore in the nuclear industry, I can tell you that much. All right, so this story was also March the 16th. So I had to set the stage for tonight's show. This story was from March the 16th about the plutonium. And then the suggestion that plutonium doesn't fall very far from the source because it's a heavy isotope. What are you talking about? Like on the atomic scale, it's considered a heavy, but they don't matter because all the isotopes are the same size. Like for all intents and purposes. You don't need the jet streams to bring plutonium worldwide, right? Or distribute it through the biosphere or the oceans on the surface or in the sky. All right, let's keep going. And so this is quite... And so this story, U.S. calls radiation extremely high, see Japan nuclear crisis worsening, New York Times. Okay, so that's going to get people's attention. They're going to come in and read that story. And they're going to see these depictions of people in paper suits. Now, if any of them got a big dose of radiation, they're going to kill that Geiger counter. So they need another room with just boxes and boxes and boxes of Geiger counters. You need to take the Geiger counter that was exposed to high radiation, and now you can't use it no more. You got to send it back to the manufacturer to see if they can mitigate it and recalibrate it. Because even if you didn't get a radiation dose, say the radiation object is in a really thick plastic bag and you measured it, you're still getting gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments if it's what we're talking about, high stuff. And because people were blanketed with absurd amount of radiation. And so and these people had no idea what they were doing. These are not academics or scientists or educated people in the context of nuclear. And you don't know what they're doing. And they're only checking for gamma. And so you can't quantify radioactive contamination by only checking from gamma. It's completely disingenuous and dishonest, deceitful, and disgusting. And so I was looking at these pictures and I started zooming in. And so you see Buddy like buckling down there, the second guy, the middle guy, the guy in front of him is buckling down so he can... This is absurd to suggest that you can quantify radioactive fallout, damage, and then say, okay, you're good, or we're going to you got to get rid of your clothing, and we're going to scrub you down. And they didn't want to do that because you would have a pack mentality in the population all of a sudden, right? So these people were given inferior equipment, and then they were going people after people coming through. So if the Geiger counter showed huge numbers, they didn't get rid of the Geiger counter or send it back to the factory and use another one, a fresh one. They used the exact same one. They might have used this for weeks. In other words, this didn't work, period. Evacuees receiving radiation scans in Nohomatsu, Japan. Americans were advised by the embassy to evacuate a radius of 50 miles. And Nohomatsu. I'm going to turn the audio up just a notch because I'm talking pretty low there. My throat's a bit tickled. Welcome back to the first show of the week, Sunday night show. Hope everybody's doing well. Only problem with using these copper cups is they sweat a lot, right? Because it's filled with ice. Of course, the Japanese thinks it's rude to use ice. They believe it causes problems, health problems. And they could be right, I don't know. This is a culture that has chiropractic applications for almost 3,000 years. And that's why I went to university to be a chiropractor years ago, was because no surgeries and no medications, right? And if you can't resolve it, you'll send them off to another specialist, right? Because there's a lot of things you should do before you go take a bunch of GMO pharmaceuticals that are probably radioactive because they're grown in Ukraine and places. The plants that they're going to extract the so-called, the whole system is just, it's out of control, and it needs to be reined in. Too sweet. So, let me just move around a bit for you, give you some context. So you can see below me 5 miles, right? And at Fukushima, I think, is up here. Or, I can't remember. Koriyama is right here. And they didn't abandon Koriyama. They didn't abandon here either. Yeah, I believe that's the plant right there. Some of these models I get confused of. The chairman of the United States, oh, I did put Fukushima nuclear plant, is over here. What am I saying? Did I show you up there? I'm an idiot. Of course, Nami is north of Fukushima. Dana, wake up. The chairman of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission was Jacques Hall. All right, here we go. There's nothing easy about these shows, unfortunately. That's the only problem, right? It's, let me see what I got down here. Bear with me. There's nothing being done fast tonight, I can tell you that much. I was out welding and grinding for several hours today. That's a dirty job, isn't it? It's better than trying to find somebody who's going to do it for free. We got a lot of good, we finally got a good amount of proper stuff for welding. Everything was on sale that I got. You don't need a lot of it, but you need some, certain, like you need a welding blanket to protect you from in dangerous spots. So if you're lying underneath a weld, you want a blanket on you. If you haven't got a full outfit that can repel this molten lava from dripping on you, you got to have a blanket, right? And I picked mine up. It was a big one, like 6 feet by 8 feet for $15 on sale. And you got to have the big vice grips with the big loops so you can get it around big chunks of metal and get it to hold. And you also got to have good magnets to hold stuff together until you can tack weld it and get it started. They make that's the kind of stuff that makes a huge difference. You got to have lots of welding rods. Ideally, the best thing is to have a great welder, right? But those new little small stick welders, those things are friggin', for most applications, if not all of them, because you can make them work too, right? They're fine. And it's not like I'm welding up bulldozers or something that needs enormous amount of integrity, right? Or these things will hold up to any kind of stuff I'm gonna put it through, because I'm a pretty big wimp. I don't push any of my equipment hard. And I just acid washed my motor on the bike and the transfer cases. I should show you pictures of some of the stuff I do to the equipment, because I take care of my shit, right? I do, I really do. And now that we got the whole I basically got a little machine shop built over the last year and a half. And I got lots and lots of supplies. So we're in good shape for that. I can do it. I forget sometimes how much work I can actually do. Because you got to realize, at one point I was running 10 dive boats, commercial diving boats, and barges, and I've ran so many dive vessels, not counting everything else, right? And you got to be, jury rig. And you can't really jury rig a lot of stuff in those industries, but you got to make things work. It helps when you're 20 hours away from a community, right? That you can do things yourself. The chairman of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So remember, this is, and we got a little video coming up of that because I had gathered that up a long time ago. Actually, they're going to refer to it. I'm going to play it. March the 16th, 2011. And this is a journalist. This is a nuclear scientist. This is your typical nuclear academic. Is a journalist and nuclear scientist just another word for serial killer? Well, it's even worse than that. Right? It's really... Here we go. Keep going here, because just trying to get through one story tonight becomes a big problem. Especially when I'm digressing a lot, but I don't normally do that, but some nights I do. The announcement open, and it's because you have to, you'll see as we get through this how much how much work it takes just to tell a story. Because you got to bring in all this information, right? The announcement opened a new and ominous chapter in a 5-day-long effort by Japanese engineers to bring the 6 side-by-side nuclear reactors under control, and their cooling systems were knocked out. And you'll always see those connotations by an earthquake and a tsunami, because they don't want you to think that these things can do it on their own, right? But they absolutely, it was the earthquake that took out reactor 1. It was melting down before the tsunami got there. And so this is reactor 3. Well, it was. That's reactor 4 over there. This is the pump house. This is towards the ocean when you're coming towards me. If you go the other way, you're going interior. Now, behind reactor 4, one building over, was the common spent fuel pool. And that was on the same street as the street behind reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4, which all melted down and lost their inventories. And the evidence we got in 2021, in January, was 736 pictures that got released with no connotations, were from a drone. And when you zoomed in, reactors were pixelated out. This was the original footage from a high-quality drone. And when you zoomed in on the common spent fuel pool, it was completely pixelated out, which is holding fuel from all 6 reactor cores. So it could have been at least, well, not could have been, but there was at least, in the numbers that we got, is at least like 13 million pounds. That would have been lost, because the tsunami actually ran right through it, right? I can show you that footage if you like. But not tonight, maybe. Leaving fuel rods stored there exposed. And it would, let me digress for 1 second. I'm going to come back to that picture there, and then we'll read that headline and back to this one, because I kind of just... So I was talking about how I can zoom in, like I can come in with the video, but there's when I don't have to do all like I don't have to do because I got cuts. I'm sorry, let me come backwards. Just bear with me. Humor me for a second. So the zooms, you don't have to do everything. Zooms are great. It's really cool stuff, right? But you can also just do cuts, for instance. And you got different speed of zooms, right? So if I zoom back to the original position, that's a nice quick... It does kind of lighten up things, don't it? But something I don't use very often for some reason is cuts. And so cuts I can be just jump everywhere, right? And if you've done that in between each story, it might be better. I don't know. Let's keep going here. Before I digress again. Now, I can't, for this particular application of me coming in, I can't cut. Mr. Jasko's Most startling assertion was there was now little or no water in the pool storing the spent nuclear fuel at number 4 reactor, leaving fuel rods stored there exposed and bleeding. This is quite an interesting way to frame something so catastrophic. That's the most worst type of downplaying at all. That's reactor 4 over there. That's reactor 4. And through a little bit of magic, I can zoom over there. The fuel pools are at the top of the building. Look at the bottom of the building. I mean, right to the ground. So we actually have, I have a picture where I have all 4 sides of that building. So that cement truck that's allegedly outfitted with a water pump is put there to manipulate you into thinking that they're putting water in a fuel pool. But clearly the building cooked off. That cooked off. That is gone. And it's right alongside reactor 3, which clearly, this was the Medusa. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit here coming up. I got more pictures coming up later if we get to it. Because you know me, I got a tendency to overdo things. Jaschko's most startling assertion was that there was now little or no water in the pool. Well, clearly there's no water in either of the buildings. There is no pools. This was on the 16th, so this was they already had this picture. Right? Now, this picture in particular was a couple of weeks later, but nothing had changed from the 16th till then in the context of the visuals. Bleeding radiation into the atmosphere. It's quite an interesting statement. It wasn't bleeding. U.S. states were hit with extremely large peaks of Fukushima radioactive fallout. They call it radioactive material, which is fine, but radioactive fallout or material, radioactive fallout is what I would imagine would be the proper. Significant amount of plutonium released for months. Now remember that first story. Oh, well, plutonium won't go very far from the reactor. Radioactivity from the plant was measured globally and blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. And so this model over there was 26 days. The bottom model of radioactive fallout. But like none of these models are using the actual inventories that were lost. And each building was around 8 reactor cores. Each of these reactor cores are about equal to 100 Chernobyls. So there's 800 Chernobyls in each building. And the reason the difference is so dramatic is because Chernobyl was a new reactor. It was about 2 years old. It was a small reactor, and it was a graphite reactor, and which is totally different. These are pure uranium, pure plutonium. These are just pure disease factories on a global scale, too, because everything with replicating cells. As a result, we believe the radiation levels are extremely high. This is Jaschko, which could possibly impact the ability to take corrective measures. Look, you know, when Jaschko, who's the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States, without a doubt seen the video, not just the picture, was seen it in real time, or within 10 minutes. Right? Because he was in a need, he needed to know, right? He was in the most... If anybody was going to see it, it would have been Jaschko. Let's put it that way, right? So when he makes a statement, which is the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that we believe the radiation levels are extremely high, which could possibly impact the ability to take corrective measures, every other academic on the planet would have said the fuel pool and the reactor cores were rejected from the buildings. You can't work at the site. It's lethal doses everywhere. On the 16th, there is nobody working there. If they did, they didn't. Dead man tells no tales, right? Later Thursday, I got that video actually coming up from Japan Nuclear Industry Safety Agency. Shitaka Nagayama was more equivocal, saying because we have been unable to go to the scene, which is what I just told you, right? You can't go to the scene because you eject the reactor cores and fuel pools all over the site. Just lethal doses no matter where you're going. Your organs melt. And it's a very unpleasant experience. And after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this is very visual if you don't like this kind of stuff. But let's talk about it. You got to talk about it. There's lots of pictures of people died and they were squatted down with their pants down around their feet. And what it was, their organs melted. They had to just stop and excrete right there on the spot. And what they were excreting was their liquefied organs. And they just died or fell over and died. There was a lot of people. You know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one of the things people really don't talk about in a nuclear war, well, it kills a lot of people, yeah, but how does it kill them, though? Well, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, they were finding people outside the radiation area, but in the blast zone, that were thrown up in the air, say, 600 feet, and horses and whatever, and pets and whatever, farm animals and everything. They were found splattered underground because they went up around 600 feet. They would have died. They weren't alive when they hit the ground, most likely, right? Because you're talking about the speeds of the winds that done that they were getting hit with supersonic winds, right? And so probably just that kind of that wasn't like a blunt object hitting them in many ways. So the spokesman for Japan's Nuclear Industry Safety Agency, they didn't have a regulatory agency at that time. They created one after. Was more equivocal, saying because we have been unable to go to the scene, we cannot confirm whether there's water left or not in the spent fuel pool at reactor number 4. Again, reactor 4 is over there. There was no way they didn't know it. And you can't go there anyway because of reactor 3. Even if reactor 4 didn't melt down or blow up, you couldn't go there because reactor 3 did. You couldn't go to the fuel pool beyond reactor 4. You couldn't go to reactor 1 and 2 either. That would have been a death sentence, right? We cannot confirm whether there's water left or not in the spent fuel pools. Well, clearly it's not. They're like, they had the videos, by the way, and they have the video, and we've never seen it, of reactor 4 detonating. They have that video. If you got the video of reactor 3 detonating from a security camera, you got the video of reactor 4 detonating from a security camera, right? Because that's what that video was from. So remember, this is March the 16th. So when they make that statement on March the 16th from the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency spokesperson saying they can't go there, we're unable to go to the scene. We cannot confirm. You know, like because of their position, they could have flown in a helicopter, would have brought them in, and dropped them off, right? And they can't go there because they didn't want to die. That's why they didn't go there. So, but also concerns about 2 other reactors where spent fuel rods were stored, number 5 and 6. Bear with me. I just thought about another piece of information I should bring in. Let's start off with this though. So 5 and 6. Number 5 reactor. Hang on a second. Because the equipment I got is pretty friggin' difficult equipment to work with. There's usually 5 people work the audio, all this back and forth stuff, the cameras and everything else. But my equipment generally is 4 people. And so sometimes it takes me an enormous amount of time. Here we go, I found it anyway, so we're talking about, I'm going to come back to this first. No, right there, right here. Concerns about 2 other reactors where the spent fuel rods were stored, number 5 and 6. I'm going to show you those reactors 5 and 6. No. I got to come back to the other screen. Bear with me. We'll get there. That's the way it goes sometimes. I want to show you reactor 5 and 6 and the common spin fuel pool. But I'm going to go to reactor 5 and 6 right now. We're almost there. And then there's the... Alright, I got it. So along the way is the dry storage. So reactor 5 and 6 are separate. Alright, so we'll go through these headlines. Number 5 released may explain why so much radioactive xenon was detected. This was a major study in October 28, 2011. Why so much radioactive... This is quite an interesting statement. The xenon, of course, in Washington was at 1 million atoms per square meter on the ground. You can't have just xenon. Everything else that would have been in that particular so-called sample. Or recriticality has occurred in one of the reactor units. But bear with me. Number 5 and 6 were not in cold shutdown after the quake. Implied report by the United States nuclear industry, which doesn't say anything negative about nuclear. So if they said that, then it wasn't in cold shutdown. And cooling at the spent fuel pool number 5 stopped until cables were installed. But you couldn't install cables there. And fresh fuel was loaded in both reactors, which is, say, 30% of the fuel, which meant the reactors, right, 2/3 of the reactor core was fuel that had already gone through a chain reaction. Cesium rises by reactor 5 and 6 discharge at highest levels in months. And this story here, number 5 release, may explain why so much radioactive xenon was detected. So clearly, when you look at a major study, right, this is quantifying releases into the atmosphere from what they're saying is 5 and 6. And discharge, and another study showing discharges. Okay, so this drone footage came out on the 10th anniversary. Well, not on the anniversary, but the January of that year, 2021. Now, this drone, when you zoomed in on it, this is what these pictures are. Because originally the pictures are not zoomed in, so you're going over the site. And they were good quality. It was a very good quality drone for back in the days. And when you zoom in, you can see the damage of what water does. Water is pretty incredible. But up on the top of it, now those... Let me come back to that window one more time that we were just on. So that's the tanks right here. That's reactor 5 and 6 up there, the greenish ones. But right along the way, because they're separated from reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are down below me that way, south. But this little doozy right here is the dry storage. And so clearly the tsunami ran through that. And we actually have pictures from 2000. There was 2,000 pictures released in the first couple of years, and of course we scavenged every one of them because I'm like a literally nuclear pack rat for gathering up stuff. And so the common spent common dry storage is right here. This was full of casts, so clearly they lost a lot of casts. Now these casts weigh 50,000 pounds. They don't float. So they got released into the ocean. They would have been bashed up, but I don't know if they would have broke open, but they certainly would sink. And I'm sure some of them broke open. But up there is reactor 5 and 6. So when I zoomed in from the drone footage that was released 10 years after 2021, I seen these pixelated building. And reactor 6 was pixelated completely out, as you can see. So when you're heading over there, oh, I'm on the wrong side. So you can see the damage to the big tanks, for instance, and you see the other tanks are shifted. That's important because this is at the same level as those tanks. So that would have happened inside of that building. And anything that could damage these tanks that much, imagine what it done inside that building. Okay, so the common spent fuel pool, or reactor 6, this is reactor 5, and this is pump house. That's reactor 6, that's the pump house, and that tall stack over there is the vent for the fuel pools and the torus, because they're always burping radiation out of what they call burping it, releasing it and poisoning humans worldwide with it. So why was reactor 6, the pump house and the stack, pixelated out? Why did they do that? And you can see the damage to those tanks. So then this is at the same level, the dry storage. Okay. Hang on, we're not through it yet. But we're almost there. Now we're going to talk about, quickly, the common spent fuel pool. And the common spent fuel pool would have had around 15,558 assemblies in it, because they don't have a repository anywhere in Japan. Where would they put it? All right, where were they gonna? They don't have a repository to put anything, so it was kept in the fuel pools. Okay. And behind reactor 4, which clearly detonated, we're almost through this part. My apologies. So beyond reactor 4, which is clearly gone on day 16, on March 16, was the common spent fuel pool, which had around 13 million pounds into it. Over 15,000 assemblies. Each assembly is around 1,800 pounds. It's around 100 fuel rods. Each fuel rod is 12 feet long, weighs 18 pounds. Not around 12 feet long, it's 12 feet long, and they weigh exactly 12 pounds. And they're fuel pellets of uranium and plutonium that are coated in the zirconium cladding. And zirconium cladding, the zirconium that they're using, is the same zirconium they were using for flashes, which was just so evil. It's just so evil what they done back in the day. And these were flashes for the old, you remember the old-fashioned cameras, the 20s, the 30s, and that where you had this great big flash, and it would go, and then they would unscrew the bulb and throw it on the street somewhere, and because they had a little hammer, would hit this little bulb, and when the bulb broke open, zirconium would flash, and then they had the reflectors around it that would reflect it out, and then it would take the picture, right? So that was incredible. That was radioactive fallout. Every room, every wedding, every news event where they were flashing that things off, these people were getting brutal radiation poisoning. And then the cleaners that were sweeping up after, the garbage man was transporting it, it's absurd. Going around throwing dirty bombs everywhere. That's what those those camera flashes were back in those days when they were using the same zirconium. So when it's exposed to oxygen, in other words, it detonates. So the tsunami ran through here. There was no cooling. It was loaded with an enormous amount of fuel. It boils off the water quite quickly if they don't. Typical fuel pool, you need 120,000 liters into it each day. And so if you're not putting water into it, it starts heating up pretty quick because the water also has to be circulating. And right alongside of this common spent fuel pool was Medusa and Reactor 4 and Reactor 1 and 3, and they all lost their entire inventories. So that's Reactor 3, by the way, which is right alongside of this. So when that detonated, that meant you couldn't go near this no matter what. And the headlines of them saying that they ran power lines, and and that's why, I might add, that's why me get back. And that is why we have that poll tonight. Are journalists and nuclear scientists just another name for serial killer? Oh man, what am I doing? That's not what I wanted. What have I got done now? Oh crap. We'll get there. Oh, that's what I got done wrong. Hang on. I smurfed that up today. So that's why we got this particular poll tonight. Is journalists and nuclear scientists just another word for serial killer? Hang on, I'll get there. Because every nuclear scientist knew what I'm telling you. And so when they came out and told you, I know this is confusing. That's why we're going so methodically to make sure that you can appreciate what they really done to you and who done it to you. And how can we have a future with people like that on our planet? It's a serious question that everybody needs to ask themselves many, many times. If the American analyst is accurate and emergency crews at the plant have been unable to keep the spent fuel at the inoperable reactor properly cooled, it needs to remain covered with water at all times. So you see this, because they never had to cover up multiple reactors melting down before, right? And I think that they were like off balance for the first year or so. But then the evidence became so incredible that this was an extinction level event that a lot of them just came on board, or they were just replaced in their key positions with goblins that were willing to come out and lie to you. And apparently, from what we've seen over the last decade alone, because we cover a lot of the news cycle, they're all goblins. These people they hate your guts. It needs to remain covered with water at all times, and it needs to circulate, which is more important. Because after a short while, then it starts melting down. Once it boils, you're talking about heating temperatures of 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. It doesn't need oxygen to burn. That's the thing about a nuclear meltdown. And that's what makes it so fearsome. It doesn't need oxygen. And so deep geological repositories can't contain the nuclear meltdown because it will cannibalize when it finally melts down, and everything will melt down when you put it away with no containment, with no ability to stop it. Could make it difficult not only to fix the problem of reactor 4, but keep service in many of the other problem reactors at the plant. And on the 16th, they knew you weren't going to resolve anything. And so they were very methodical in how they framed that narrative. Doomsday-like radiation release in fire in pool at Unit 4 would be a global catastrophe. And that's 2012, so this was a nuclear waste expert. But any academic in the nuclear industry that looked at reactor 3 and reactor 4, not just 1 and 2, but looked at those in particular, knew the fuel pools were gone and the reactor cores were gone. And just a single reactor core is worse than all nuclear meltdowns that we know about in history. These were, at the time, this was one of the biggest reactor sites on the planet, the biggest capacity. And they run these things very hard for about 14 months. And then there's around 11,000 maintenance things that have to be done. So they usually bring in people, 1,000, 1,500 blue-collar workers to do that work because they're going to get exposed to heavy radiation. They don't want that to show up in the statistics of the employees. In the worst case, experts said workers could be forced to vacate the plant altogether, which they had done. When Medusa went shui, there was no going back there. Right? They originally, eventually they sent in remote control by wire, I might add, bulldozers to plow in high radiation levels areas, the fuel assemblies and stuff where they already landed. They had to plow that under the ground before humans can drive past it, let alone walk past it. In the worst case, experts said workers could be forced to vacate the plant altogether, and the fuel rods in the reactors and spent fuel pools would be left to melt down, leading to a much larger release of radioactive material. Well, they were left to melt down, and they did. This is not up for debate. This is a fact. Well, radiation levels at the plant varied tremendously. Jasko said that the peak level reported there would be lethal within a fairly short period of time. And we know this from off-site doses acknowledged by Harvard University nuclear scientists, that the plumes would have been around 10 sieverts per hour doses that were going through the local communities. This is why they evacuated all these communities. That's lethal right away, that dose. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. So 10 sieverts in a plume, you're talking about thousands of sieverts in that plume, right? Because you're getting all this energy and radiation. It's just absurd. Gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments, beta rays, alphas, X-rays rather. He had another spent fuel pool at number 3. Was losing water and could soon be in the same conditions. Now, when he made the statement, what was really interesting was Reactor 3 was already gone. This was a 190-story, 65-meter, 19-story building that was reinforced. And so those pillars you see and those supporting beams, see that supporting beam right here, for instance? You can actually, or right there, if that was clean, you can actually turn an SUV around on that, like a 2 or 3 point turn. We're talking, these things are massive. So remember, all of this is March the 16th when everything is already gone. Nutso, right? March the 16th, everything is already detonated. So on Thursday morning, I'm going to play this video right now. On Thursday morning, the Japan's self-defense forces started dumping water from a helicopter on Reactor 3, making several passes. And they plan to do the same for number 4 sometimes Thursday. Of course, all 600 helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died. This is equal to over 3,000 Chernobyls, and inventories were gone. Chernobyl was brutal. Don't get me wrong. Chernobyl was brutal, right? Catastrophic. And you can go watch my presentations on the anniversary of this year, for instance, and last year. And last year we had, 900 studies we flashed through? To give you a concept of how many facets is studied after a nuclear accident. They studied everything. They studied everything in the ecosystem and people, and it's really interesting because they know everything gets contaminated and there's an adverse effect for everything. This is why they're doing a study to look for it and quantify it. See? These are unbelievably deceitful, dishonest, and murderous people. This technology should never exist. And at some point we will come to our senses. On Thursday morning, Japan's self-defense forces, kamikazes, started dumping water from a helicopter. We're going to play that video. On Reactor 3, the Medusa itself, which, and you know Medusa, and as you see in the video, because you do some zoom-in shots, the buildings are gone. Let's play that. I turned the audio off because it's shot from a long way away. I'll be right back. And they done this for just a few hours. So it was a lot of these are the same pass or whatever, right? There was only 2 or 3 helicopters that went in there. But look how far they're staying away from the reactors. Look how high they are. These buildings are 19 stories. And typically the reactor needs 4,500 tons a minute. It needs 1 million gallons a minute. And of course, downhill, where does all water is washing the nuclear detonations material off-site, and everything is downhill, right? And guess what's downhill? Is the ocean, right? Tokyo Electric was also working busily to complete a high-powered line to the plant to restore electricity needed to run the cooling system, according to a senior nuclear industry executive. Which is the very reason, by the way, we have that poll, is those types of people. As journalists, nuclear scientists, nuclear academics, and nuclear experts. Just another word for serial killer. Omnicide machine is what we should have put there, I guess. Because they take out everything. So, like, to suggest they were going to build a high-power line to the plant to restore electricity to run the cooling systems, the building doesn't even exist anymore, save for reactor 3, which means you can't run a line to the plant. The tsunami took out everything. And let me go into a little bit of detail on that, maybe. This story is crazy, isn't it? It's crazier than most people can comprehend, absolutely. It's just crazy that the nuclear industry is that insane that they done this. They kept this technology, and then in order for it to exist, they had to lie to you. In order for nuclear to exist, they got to kill everything. Eventually, they will kill everything for nuclear power just to exist. So I'm just looking for a picture of the tsunami. I know it's right there. And normally I must be in the wrong. Just give me one more chance here. Hang on. And so when you look at, that's reactor 3. Let's look at reactor 3 immediately after the explosion. Like, there is nothing left. Right? There is nothing left of that building. The fuel pool's reactor cores are at the top of the building. TEPCO, send us people who don't mind dying. I noticed Arnie Gunnarsson didn't. Like, this was in the middle of chaos. So think about what was happening. Think about what was happening. Let me show you I want to show you the tsunami first, though. So the tsunami comes in and runs right through the site. Right, so that picture over there, you can see the water just boiling through the site. So a tsunami comes in at around 400 miles per hour. So that took out all the infrastructure. Not just. Here's a picture of what around 1,200 miles of the coastline looked like. It was like a big wood chipper, right? And then this is the red are people that they found that were dead, and yellow were people were missing because they were in a big wood chipper that went through the whole coastline. And I'm going to play a video of the original reply by the Japan Suga at the time, the Japanese Prime Minister. And you can hear the translator she can barely talk. She's in shock. So let's play that video. It's a heartbreaking video, but just a short video of the tsunami to give you some context.
Japanese Prime Minister appeared on TV to put into play a plan they'd rehearsed for years.
We will secure the safety of the people of Japan, and in order to minimize the damage, the government will make every effort possible. And we ask the people of Japan to continue to be cautious and vigilant and keep tuned in to the reports on the television and radio. And we ask the people of Japan to act calmly.
And nobody was calm. There was panic everywhere. And even though you hear a lot of people, originally they were saying the Japanese were very stoic and nobody panicked. It simply wasn't true. You had a tsunami coming in at hundreds of miles per hour. If you didn't panic, you didn't survive. As you've seen, many didn't survive, right? On Wednesday, American Embassy in Tokyo, this is still the 16th we're talking about, on day 5, and the voice from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission told Americans to evacuate a radius of 50 miles, but a lot of people couldn't evacuate, obviously, right? You know, the whole country and the whole world was, and rightfully so, was totally fixated on the tsunami and the devastation. But the nuclear industry wasn't. It was paying attention. And it cooked up the stories. And this, we're going through some of it. We go through it all the time. But tonight we're still trying to get through a single story. And we're just going to challenge every law in that story. And it's taken us an hour and 10 minutes to challenge every law. And we still got a ways to go. And I got to bring in documentation to support my assertions, obviously. Because I'm too stupid to do a radio show where I can just tell you the facts instead of having to educate you. So the idea of what I do is I provide you with the documentation. So you go out and check my narrative against their narrative, and they don't provide you any documentation. And so then the question is, why not? The Japanese, you got nothing to hide, why are you hiding it? The Japanese themselves, who have told everyone within 20 kilometers, about 12 miles, to evacuate, and those 20 to 30 kilometers to take shelter, which is the worst thing you can do. Well, the worst thing you can do is live within 100 miles of a disease factory called a nuclear power plant or a nuclear dump. But, you know, the population has no concept of radioactive fallout. They have no concept because the industry is very careful not to have that into the ether. Otherwise, resistance would become overwhelming against this industry. While maps of the plume of radiation being given off by the plant shows that an elongated cloud will be stretched across the Pacific. Elongated cloud stretched across the Pacific. American officials said it would be so dissipated by the time it reached the west coast of the United States that it would not pose a health threat. Canada and the United States turned off their legacy war, Cold War radiation stations for the most part. Canada moved their radiation stations 200 miles inland, so it took many, many weeks before they had a spot, and weeks before they shifted everything, and then a couple of months before they got everything working again. Quite convenient time, wasn't it? Because they couldn't turn it on if they stayed on the coastline. Denied it had anything to do with Fukushima. So suggesting that it wouldn't pose a health threat, this is on day 16. So the law, you can see, was symmetrical through all the media we cover. So here's one of the stories of the radioactive fallout. We got lots of studies, lots of models from the actual studies and backed up by the studies. This was an Ottawa study here in Canada. West Coast hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. Would have been the same amount in that case of 133 iodine, right? And it would have been 1/3 less of that of iodine-132. And then it would have been 31 times, it would have been 220 million, about 20 million atoms of iodine-131 per liter. And that same, but it would have been saturated with curium isotope, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod I showed you earlier. of iodine-129 in rain after Fukushima, 15 million year half-life. And so all these other isotopes of iodines are going to be in that same sample. It's not just going to be... Now, by the way, the 131, the 132, 133 are 9 times more, or 132, 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing, radiating the thyroid glands of all the species, not just humans, than the unbelievably effective 131. We got studies showing 20 million atoms, I think, that one there, or actual particles, even worse. I'm hacking because I didn't wear my respirator today when I was working on equipment. Because Sundays, a lot of the time, Sundays is a good day for me to work on equipment. Like a few hours. I'm not that healthy. I can't do very much, right? But I'm good at what I'm doing, so I accomplish a lot anyway. I'm just slow. Okay, so you had 20 million particles of iodine-131 per liter in the U.S. You had 220, in another study, and appropriately so, 220 million atoms. That's important because the ratio of 131 to 132 is 10, and to 133 is 30, and to 131 is 31. So 220 million atoms, 20 million atoms, that's really close, right? And I'm surprised you could have, well, not iodine-131 in particular, but they couldn't read a lot of other isotopes because that single would have drowned out a lot of other betas and alphas and neutrons and everything else because it was such a high single. But those isotopes would have been there and they would have done the calculation because they know the ratios, right? So there's, for every iodine-129, there's 10 times more 132 and 30 times more 133. But that's enough, right, to cause every species in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere, to be producing radioactive hormones for the rest of their lives. So this is why you're seeing the disappearing of the insects and the species that are dependent upon them. First, West Coast hit with 20 million atoms, 220 million atoms of iodine-131. So that's never going to go away. 129, that's never going away. But the biggest byproduct of radioactive fuel rods is different isotopes of curium, which are man-made, right? These are all man-made. And your body doesn't have an autoimmune trigger to defend against any of these anthropogenic man-made isotopes. And the plutonium, of course, all the americium, neptunium, the strontiums, the uraniums. So this statement was quite interesting. Japan Times column, as the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. As a journalist, a leak, but when you hear it, because the editor would have changed the words, see? But the journalist who wrote it would have said, will come out, and they put in leak out because this is what they call a leak. The plume covers, it's a continuous plume covering the entire planet, and that's referred to as a leak. And that's one of the reasons that we have that poll tonight. What the hell is it? Is journalist, nuclear scientist just another word for serial killer? Well, clearly. Now, Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. The idea of that statement is it's actually 80 years of emissions from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide that are splitting atoms into the biosphere, into the ecosystem, is producing plumes like this every day. These plumes are only based on a very small inventory. Some of these plumes are only based upon venting. Now, anthropogenic or man-made pollution from industries don't make plumes that covers the whole planet. There is no other plume model where the whole planet is symmetrically covered in that material, right? The only thing that is radioactive fallout that has those particular attributes, because it doesn't need a jet stream. The particles are so tiny. In fact, these particles, anthropogenic that are so tiny, but they're so powerful, when they get in your body, they sequester in your muscles, your organs, your bones. And what your body's response is, no matter what, insects, birds, animals, trees, whatever, your body attacks it for the rest of your life. And humans and species, the 8 million species, their response is to produce white blood cells. And white blood, because the radiation's in your body, and your body's saturated. And every one of them are detonating almost at the speed of light. And what that means, though, is it's destroying chromosomes and DNA and cells, everything else, lesions in your organs, permanent lesions in your organs. Your body tries to repair every one of them explosions, the damage from the explosions. And at the same time, your body attacks the source. So it does that for the rest of your life. And so as you bioaccumulated in it, you're producing more white blood cells than red blood cells. And so, now your immune system is compromised right away on top of that, so you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign, right? And so the idea of global radioactive fallout is global warming because you have these invisible snowstorms. Think of a snowstorm coming out of Japan. And I got a better way of doing that. Let me do it. I probably shouldn't because I got too much on my plate already. We're still not through a whole story, and we're way down the rabbit hole, for goodness sakes. And that's the problem. If you try to challenge every law in every story, you can't get through it. And so this particular story irked me when I was reading it last week or the week before. So this is France's model based on 16 days. And it's equal to 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. And think of that as ground disposition too, by the way. So when it stops, let me go backwards on. Oh, I got it on replay, sorry, for the last stuff we were doing. So this plume model, of course, is updated for 31 days. The whole planet disappears in 31 days. But so think of the curium, the uranium, plutonium, all these other isotopes are in that plume. So that plume never goes away. And it's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. So think of it as a snow. So think of what you're looking at as a snowstorm coming out of Japan. The snow never stops coming out of Japan. Eventually, the snowstorm starts covering the whole planet. Snow never stops coming out. Snow never melts, and the snow never goes away and never stops coming out. And so eventually, what happens, right? Everything just frozen and freezing and buried under snow. But now think of it as radiation fallout, where it never stops emission of radioactive fallout, and that eventually the plume, these meltdowns don't need oxygen to sustain themselves. They can theoretically burn forever. And so the plume covers the whole planet in about 30 days. It never stops coming out. The radiation never goes away. But you can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or throw fucking rocks at it. And you can't chase it away. It tends to concentrate in the testicles. 360 atoms radioactive. Now, they were spraying salt water on it to hoodwink you, but what the sulfur does, they knew this from the 50s and 60s ocean testing, was the sulfur is liberated from the water at these enormous 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, for instance. Just bear with me, actually. I'm going to show you all the other stuff. I might as well show you this stuff, too, because this is actually ridiculously important. Sulfur. The whole story's nuts and out. Well, why ain't that right there? Trans-Pacific pollution. Okay, where did the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs go? That should have been in my folder right there. That can't just disappear. Let me see. Maybe I put it down here. Maybe I'm just getting old. And forgetful. Oh, there it is. I'll be damned. I must have moved it over there. I'm stupid like that sometimes. Okay, here we go. The sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. The uranol peroxide enhanced nuclear fuel corrosion in seawater. Just stay with me. And MIT actually mentions the buckyballs. It's a 12-minute video. I should play it, but I'm not going to. All right, here we go. So a lot of the plumes were the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. And that was acknowledged. 360 atoms of radioactive sulfur. What they're talking about is the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. The Prime Minister ordered a halt to cooling after he was advised seawater could cause a chain reaction or a recriticality. So there was an unprecedented phenomenon for using salt water in Fukushima reactors, forming uranium compounds able to travel long distances like carbon buckyballs. So this is from one of the studies, and they were trying to articulate the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. Bear with me. I got no idea what's going on here. I'll fix it. Well, that's the wrong one. Bear with me one more time. It doesn't matter how much work you do. It's still, there's lots of things will. So the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs are basically like a spherical ball. And they're able to ingest uranium, plutonium, americium, and everything else into the spherical buckyball. And that creates something that is not manageable for humans. So uranol peroxide enhanced nuclear fuel corrosion. There's a couple more. Radioactive sulfur, which is a neutron, by the way. Okay, here we go. So I think it went this way. Where's the sulfur to? So there's the sulfur, hydrogen sulfur, peroxide, hydrogen peroxide, sulfur, buckyballs. And then the study helps. So because the tsunami ran through the site, it disabled, 1,200 miles of the coastline. There was no telephone poles functional or left standing for a lot of it, because it was like one big wood chipper, right? So when the reactors detonated, what that meant was you couldn't go in there and work. A human can't survive there. So they didn't. So when they tell you they're connecting power, they're building lines, they simply not. That was simply a distraction. That they were putting water into the fuel pool. You can't put water into a pool that's already gone. Again, I got more evidence coming up to give you that. The Deputy Secretary of Energy said the United States was also providing sophisticated nuclear detection devices. Some are flown aboard American aircraft. It was one of the aircraft carriers, USS Ronald Reagan. 12 of their engines had to be replaced in their jets because when they started them up, they were ejecting radioactive plumes. We are dealing with this as a day-to-day, minute-to-minute situation. Well, let's keep going here, because we're still on the first story of night. believe it or not. Because the Washington Post or Washington Times tells so many lies. In order to challenge every lie in each story, this is how painful it actually is. It was not immediately clear how many people live within zones. And years ago, we used to do this to all the professors, academics from, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford, MIT. I burnt all of them. We're going to do it again, too. I already downloaded the new videos from YouTube to make sure they work on my operating system. I have the old videos, but because YouTube changes its format, I was hoping to be a bit better quality. Because back then, we were still in our infancies of live streaming videos, and there was no high quality back in 2011. It was not immediately clear how many people live within the zone around the plant that American officials believe should be evacuated, but the zone gets far closer to the city of Sendai with a population of 1 million. Well, look at this plume of Neptunium-239 based on TEPCO's number after 20 days to your left and 21 days here. These are TEPCO's which refuse to acknowledge any of the reactors currently melted down. As of August 24, 2023, they refuse to acknowledge this happened anymore. They say what got out was equal to 3 grams of sugar. But I mean, that's completely... But as we get a few years down the road or a decade down the road of these lies, everybody will be telling the same lie. Right? Because the population is, unfortunately, is very gullible. Okay, so we're going to play this video at a hearing on Wednesday. Now, I got this chopped up. Remember, I made this video probably 11 years ago or something. At a hearing on Wednesday, Senator Barbara, and there's no need to replace her because it's really good. Chairman of the Senate, she's retired now, right? Environment and Public Works Committee pointed out that 50 miles evacuation zone around San Onofre in California meant 7 million people would have to be evacuated. Now, she's talking, I might be wrong, Bill Bouchard, who was the secretary of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because Jasko was on his way. This was a Senate hearing, a public hearing, and Jasko wasn't there yet, so they had Bill Bouchard, who was the next expert, an expert who was there to educate the Congress and Senate. But listen very closely to her narratives, and then I put in, because his answer for almost anything was, I don't want to comment on this. He's the expert, right? He's there to educate everybody. And so because time constraints, I chopped it down to, it's actually fairly funny, but if it wasn't so serious, right? Okay, I think I'm ready. I got to put my headphones down, sing along with everybody. I'm going to adjust the volume in real time on your end.
We're here to get a briefing on the ongoing crisis associated with the nuclear power plants in Japan. I'm very privileged that we have the executive director for operations at the NRC here, Bill Bouchard.
I couldn't speculate on that.
An expert, a true expert as well.
Again, I wouldn't wish to speculate.
So we feel very blessed that you could come and stand in until the chairman comes, and we really do welcome you.
Again, I can't speculate.
Well, teaching all of us the lessons that we have to take away from what is happening.
I couldn't speculate on that. What we believe is a significant amount of fuel damage in the 3 operating reactors, units 1, 2, and 3, which were operating at the time of the earthquake. And then because of the spent fuel problems that are in Unit 4 of that reactor facility. All of those factors taken into combination, if that same type of source term, that same type of radiological problem existed in the United States, our recommendation to state governments would be to evacuate out to 50 miles.
Well, that's a really good point, because I'm asking you, do you know how many people live within 50 miles of San Onofre nuclear power plant?
I do not know.
Well, I'm going to tell you how many people. 7.4 million people.
That's on the 16th, right? March the 16th. The good old days. All right. Are we getting any closer to the end of the first story, Dana? No. No, we're not. We're not. It's absurd. They tell so many lies that the only way you can... You got to go through all of this work to denounce their lies, or to prove that they lied. That's what I'm doing. I'm just proving that they lied and the significance of the lie, and it's just this symmetrical. Every one of them are in on it. This is the game, and it's the most deadly game, the most unforgiving game, with the most horrific repercussions for not understanding and not avoiding. Because you come here, you get educated, hopefully shortly, within a few videos, you're able to extrapolate a lot on your own, is what I'm saying. You're able to start making informed decisions about, at all costs, avoiding food from stupid Japan, idiot. Counterparts report that the country's political bureaucratic leadership has appeared frozen in place and time, unwilling to communicate clearly about the scope of the problem, and in some cases unwilling to assist, except outside assistance. And so hang on, let's go back. Who ran this story? Washington Post, or I can't remember. Let's go back. I want to see who. There it is. The New York Times. I apologize to the Washington Post, but you're a piece of shit too, and we're going to be covering you tomorrow night. All right, let's keep rolling. So the New York Times, and you have 505 comments talking about bananas and potato chips and walking in the sunshine and flying on a fucking airplane. I swear, I get upset sometimes because, okay, so I'm willing to communicate clearly about the scope of the problem Japan was, and in cases I'm willing to accept outside assistance. Which reminds me of this story. Leaked emails show the British government worked with the nuclear public relation campaign, on a public relation campaign to downplay Fukushima, and that the degree of collusion was shocking. So they were talking about how the government of France, for instance, EDF itself, Areva and Westinghouse, which are gigantic conglomerate corporations that have a facet of many of our energy departments worldwide. The British official told Areva, we need to quash any stories trying to compare that to Chernobyl. And we need to ensure that the anti-nuclear chaps and chappists do not gain ground on this. British official now. We need to occupy the pro-nuclear territory and hold it. So they were taking off their gloves, and anything dirty they were going to do it. To delete your account, delete your Facebook, your YouTube, whatever it took, Twitter. And we know that Japan, for instance, when they were burning rubble in this one community, radioactive rubble, the stupidest thing imaginable, they actually paid Twitter $54,000 US to censor a couple of people on Twitter. So do you think Twitter, for 1 second, didn't take the $54,000? Two American officials said they believe that the Japanese government itself is not getting a clear picture of the Tokyo Electric Power Company. Well, of course they were. How could they not? So this was the apologists at work. So former Fukushima Daiichi Works said, I believe the country will be evacuated. Number 4 fuel pool collapsed. And I've already showed you, and I'll show you more coming up. Clearly, reactor 4 collapsed right away. So banning Japan would have been appropriate, let alone Tokyo. It's 36 million people, metropolitan on Tokyo, right? American officials were careful to offer no public comparisons to past nuclear accidents when discussing the Fukushima disaster. But clearly the crisis in Japan already far outstrips what happened at 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania, where very little radiation escaped a crippled reactor. That's simply not true. 3 Mile Island was brutal. That was brutal. And what they done after was even worse. They actually have studies now showing that, a lot of, almost 100,000 people evacuated. They left their pets home. A lot of them left their doors open, but their windows open, right? And a lot of their pets died before they came back and after they came back. And then we have studies showing plume models of cancer clusters. And you can go back last year, year before, and you'll see my presentations on 3 Mile Island full of academic studies backing up these assertions, right? And by the way, Santa Susana, which wasn't a commercial reactor, but was a salt reactor, plutonium salt reactor, its releases was 460 times more than 3 Mile Island. And currently they've built, since then, they've built over 500,000 homes within 10 miles of that. That's still melting down, right? This industry lying is they couldn't exist, right, without lying. Their entire legacy is predicated upon lying and deception and deceit and dishonesty. Where very little radiation escaped a crippled reactor, a British official told Arriva we need to quash any stories trying to compare this to Chernobyl. The effort now is to keep the Japanese crisis involved at least 3 reactors that had been in active use before the quake and 3 others that were inactive but had storage pools for spent. So there was a lot of emphasis on the 16th, 5 days after, placed on the storage pools for spent fuel, which is their repository, because you don't have a repository in Japan, let alone anywhere else in the world. So that was their actual repository, and they had 4 decades of reactor cores. From escalating to the level of the worst nuclear disaster in history, Chernobyl. But either one of these reactors are 800 times worse than Chernobyl because of the fuel pools and because of the volatility, and I'm talking about this earlier, where Chernobyl was a graphite reactor, was a small reactor, was a new reactor, didn't have any fuel pools whatsoever. These had 40 years of fuel at the top of the buildings that wasn't in the common spent fuel pool, that was completely redacted from the drone footage pictures that I showed you earlier, right? That was right behind this one, reactor 4, and right alongside it was reactor 2, and right alongside that was 3, right alongside that was reactor 2, and right alongside that was reactor 1. They all melted down, lost their entire inventories, which is around 9 reactor cores in those buildings. So when you talk about fuel pools from escalating, now this is 2013 picture, but I showed you pictures earlier, but there was no mistaking when they looked at the original pictures that the reactors were gone. And like they, and let me explain why. I'll play a video in a second of what am I doing wrong here? Oh, I want to come back over to the poll. So, is journalist and nuclear scientist just another word for serial killer? And let me articulate that a bit better for you. This clip I put together over 10 years ago. And there was many journalists. This happened to be 4 very high profile. The one behind me is ABC Cecilia Vega, who's currently at the White House for CBS and PBS. She was originally Australia, ABC, the major media, mainstream media. And now she's promoted to the press secretary, press club at the White House and the Pentagon. And she makes $1 million a year being a monster, just like the rest of them, I'm sure. That's CNN. Rupert Winfield Hayes, of course, told the same lie about Reactor 3, where he claimed he was on top of Reactor 3 in the fuel pools. You got to hear this video. I really appreciate it. I should really play it every single day. I do quite often. Because I always felt this video would damn the industry, but no. 10 years later, they're still rolling. Well, they're not. They're going backwards, don't get me wrong. I'm going to play the video. Here we go.
Where I was standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
So remember, they're pretending they're 190 feet up in the air above the building to your left that doesn't exist anymore.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
Right, and so that's one of the reasons we got a poll, is because of these perpetual monsters. That's the only way you can describe journalists, nuclear scientists. They're the enemy of all species, aren't they? And the damage they've done is catastrophic to for forever. So March the 16th, I mean, all these laws on March the 16th, day 5. So these laws haven't changed, have they? All these years. So this was obviously coordinated by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is UN, right? And UN, according to George Bush Sr., was the New World Order. A lot of people probably heard that expression, but I don't know what it is. Thinks this is a secret cabal. But anybody got it, you know, Japan is the third biggest contributor to International Atomic Energy Agency, which is one of the many radiation. Let me play that clip of George Bush, seeing as we're here. If I don't play it, then it's not true, apparently. All my detractors, well, why didn't he play it? He can play it. You know he got it there. You know he knows where his toe. Dana's not stupid. He would have played it if he had. He lied. You'll forget about the 200 or 300, 400 other pieces of information that I do show. This is George Bush talking about UN, and he keeps calling him the New World Order. Eisenhower called him the military-industrial complex. He's talking about UN.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
He's so evil. I mean, so we got 22, 23 viewers on a show I've been doing for over a decade. They got no one else to pick on, right? They got me tortured. The censorship is too much. That's why I got a new phone. Or that's why the phone I'm going to get in particular is going to make their lives very difficult. That's why I got to wait for it to show up. As they are exposed to air, the zirconium metal cladding on the rods can catch fire. Well, not can catch fire, they'll catch fire right away. And the deadly mix, because they heat up, they'll boil off the water even quicker that's in the pool, right? And expose more of it. And because it can burn, the zirconium cladding burns at around 1800 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. That'll ignite the plutonium uranium pellets, which are also zirconium cladded. And that'll cause a cascade effect, a chain reaction, if you will. And then that'll start producing like 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. That will boil off the water. Because remember, the fuel doesn't need oxygen. right, to go to these temperatures and stay there. So it doesn't care if it's underwater or in space. But we should. As they are exposed to the air, the zirconium metal cladding on the rod catches fire. Not can catch fire, will catch fire. And a lethal mix, not deadly, it still doesn't give it the prominence it deserves. A deadly mix of radioactive elements can spew into the atmosphere. I'm surprised it didn't say leak. Pieces of more. Like when you look at these buildings and call it a leak, you're no longer a human. The most concern surrounds cesium-137. No. For every cesium-137 starters produced, there's 100 strontium-90s after the first 1,000 days or something. And then it'll produce that ratio for tens of thousands of days. And by the way, the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rod is curium isotopes. I mean, lots of documentation that acknowledges and quantifies that. Can get into food supplies or be inhaled. Can get into food supplies, Dana, or it could be inhaled. The plumes covered. This was the xenon-133, and they're showing you purple, which is an interesting color because potassium, when you burn it, is purple, and usually the cover story is potassium, right? But this model covers the whole planet. It never goes away, and this model, which is a cesium model, is 468 hours, 19.5 days, is it? Right here. And all the models and studies are, that's the consensus, is that within 20 to 30 days, the entire planet, you're in a visible radioactive snowstorm for the rest of your life. And this stuff takes a few decades to play out. You break the food chain, and you start seeing annihilation of the species, but because it plays out where they stop reproducing over many generations, 4 or 5 generations, say. Some species produce many generations in a year, so they disappear right away. But most people don't pay attention. They see a butterfly, it's a butterfly. They see housefly, it's a housefly, right? They don't think about why isn't there 2 houseflies, or where's the rest of the houseflies, or whatever. You know, because we're very complacent now that we have access to so much. I hesitate to call it entertainment, but hesitate to the average person, right, is consumed and encouraged to be consuming the propaganda machine, the TV. Every time I see the TV, I fall asleep within 15 minutes. It's like, it's the weirdest thing, eh? I hadn't had a TV. Like, I haven't watched TV for, it's going on to 30 years now. Because you can't read a book, you can't think, you can't do anything with a TV going in the background. It'll put you to sleep. You know, and the children, they would give them all this fluoride in their toothpaste. If you go take, and a kid, because there's fluoride's really sweet, they'll put a whole bunch on their toothbrush, right? And you say, don't take too much. And they're like, no. But if you take a toothbrush and put a full length on it and just eat it, and don't do this. Because what will happen is it's going to drop you to your knees. You're going to be incredibly weak. You're going to get incredible temperatures. It'll pass after about 2 minutes or 3 minutes. It was you literally feel like you're dying. So a kid will do that. They're supposed to go to school or come for supper or whatever, go to bed. But they're not functional no more. If you put them in front of the TV at all, because the TV frequency rate, refresh rate is the same as the brain waves of a child. So parents will yell at the child, but the child is not ignoring the parent. That's not in their instinct to do that. They can't acknowledge the parents exist because they don't hear that. Right? And this is why they love their cartoons and certain Disney shows and stuff like that. It's because this is a very harmful. Australia, it's illegal to have a 4-year-old none or watch TV because it does so much damage. It's acknowledged in all kinds of studies. But the CIA, FBI, the government acknowledged that TV was so powerful that if you had a 3 hour of the left media or political on TV, you had to put another 3 hours of the right, because nobody would ever vote for the right again, because they would get hypnotized by just that single narrative, right? And so if you go to the mainstream media, you'll get that narrative. And what I do is I'll bring in a whole bunch of information that'll make your brain go giggity. Jasko said radiation levels might make it impossible to continue what he called the backup cooling functions that have so far helped check the fuel melting inside the reactor. So Jasko knew right away that the reactor cores were gone, the fuel pools were gone, because he would have seen the video. They were like, yeah, they're gone. He's not naive, he's not gullible. Those efforts consist of using fire hoses to dump water on overheated fuel and then letting the radioactive steam vent into the atmosphere. There is no... This on the same day he was talking about this. This is what those two buildings looked like. And reactor 1 and 2 were gone too. And all fuel pools, there's 2 fuel pools at the top of each of the building with decades of reactor cores. So 8 of them were gone too. These were huge reactors, by the way. Pure uranium, pure plutonium. Now I apologize because the media lies so much. We've been at this for an hour and 55 minutes trying to get through one story. And I'm going to have to friggin' hustle. We're almost there. I'm going to have to hustle. No, not too bad. No, we're going to make it. We're going to get through it together, folks. All I want to do now is go and run my head into a chimney or something. Consists of using fire hoses to dump water and overheated fuel and letting the radioactive steam vent into the atmosphere. Like you're not dumping anything on that because it threw reactor cores everywhere and there's no one going there. You're not worried about tripping over debris. You're worried about getting within hundreds of feet of a fuel rod, because that's a lethal dose. It's like a sniper round. Those emergency measures carried out by a small squad of workers and firefighters. This is an interesting one. Firefighters. Really? You sent firefighters into a nuclear meltdown because they don't know what a nuclear meltdown is, right? Nuclear scientists are not going there. They got 54 other nuclear plants in the country. And they couldn't send a few employees there to help them out? Represent Japan's central effort to forestall a full-blown fuel meltdown. Very dishonest way to frame that, by the way. That would lead to much higher releases of radioactive material. Well, no. This is what it looked like when they were... That's what the journalists looked at. Said, well, I can't put that out there. See, they're not going to show you that picture and say, there's no releases. Because you're going to say, liar. But the person... So evacuee Fukushima hospital worker says 5 of the 7 babies that were born were birth defects. Of the last 7 babies, 5 had birth defects, Down syndrome, are lost by miscarriage, and after this the husband agreed to evacuate. 5 out of 7 babies born with congenital malformations. It's stunning. Mr. Jasko testimony, and it's probably 7 out of 10, but they didn't want to put there because you would say 70% right away, right? So they break it into 5 or 7. The editors did before they allowed it to be published. Jasko's testimony, the most extended comments by a senior American official on Japan's nuclear disaster, describe what amounts to an agonizing choice for the Japanese authorities. Keep sending the homeless into an increasingly contaminated area in a last-ditch effort to cover the nuclear fuel with water, do more to protect the workers, but risk letting the fuel pools boil away and thus risk a broader meltdown. Well, this has already happened. So they wrote the story as if it didn't happen. And then in order for that to play out, they wrote a very long... So whoever wrote the story was heavily involved in the nuclear industry, clearly a nuclear expert. And because the way they framed the whole story... And so the guy, whoever signed their name on the story, I believe was Matthew Wall, was one of them, a notorious crank for the nuclear industry. Fukushima nearly as serious as being attacked by nuclear weapons. In fact, if facts were known, all citizens might have left Tokyo. Well, clearly, at 29 million atoms per square meter, after a single rainfall, warranted evacuations. Experts say workers at the plant probably could not approach a fuel pool that was dry because radiation levels would be too high. Well, no. And Arnie Gunnarsson, of course, sold you out so many times. It's really something. I'm going to play that clip in a second. But, the building's gone. Reactor 4 is gone. But Arnie was in interviews where he would show videos of the 4 initiating, like a crush, and if they touch each other, then boom, she's all gone, right? Now, he made the racks for the fuel assemblies, for the fuel pools. The fuel assemblies, each assembly's got 100 fuel rods, which is a total of 1,800 pounds. And this is how they move the reactor core around in these assemblies, right? But don't believe me. Now, Arnie refused to acknowledge the building to the right is Reactor 4.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima. And Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern. If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
So, Arnie's, his wife, Megan Gunnarsson, she was a pro-nuclear spokesperson for 2 decades. That's his wife. Arnie refuses to acknowledge the building. Now, if you're looking for Fukushima, they're going to feed you Arnie Gunnarsson, Helen Caldicott, Christopher Busby, Kathryn Higley, Geraldine Thomas. There's many of them out there. There's actually not an overwhelming amount that they're going to feed you to lead you what's going on here? Hang on. Hang on, bear with me. Bear with data. La la la. Here we go. Back on track. We're almost through. In a normal operating pool, I'll come back. Where's the anatomy? The water not only provides cooling, but also shields the worker from the gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas and X-rays. And so gamma, the idea of always using gamma is to lead you away from the water so you die of thirst. Your brain can't rationalize anything. So there's Reactor 3. And Reactor 4 is right behind me. Reactor 2 is 100% meltdown. But Reactor 3 was special. It ejected the reactor core and the fuel pool right out of the buildings. So around 9 reactor cores got ejected out of the buildings onto the site. So all of these fables, they were doing this or doing that, and simply not true. And if people did go in there, it was the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language, the homeless and the destitute. And they were there strictly to get pictures, to pretend that everything was under control, or at least going to be. Appeared to be releasing radioactive steam. No, this was ejected, not appeared to did they say leaking that time? Because that's the end of it. It appeared to be releasing, yeah. Oh, that was, yeah, Matthew Wall, Sager, and Wall is was it Harvard or Stanford? I can't remember. We'll cover it again. Matthew Wall was what he brought in through the webcam to take questions from the audience on Fukushima instead of the nuclear academics and nuclear scientists and nuclear engineers at Stanford, at Oxford, I can't remember if it was Stanford or Oxford. It was one of them. And Matthew Walls, of course, if you go look up his stories, he's still telling you the same lies, right? And remember, this has been going on for a long time, this propaganda machine. I have a whole folder on radium. Wow. And now they, like, what's her name? Lost her two hands. The French lady scientist. It's unbelievable I can't remember that. Just bear with me. I hate it when that happens, eh? Oh, there she is. I still can't remember. I asked my brain, won't let me remember her name. She lost both of her hands, but she won 2 Nobel Prizes, right? To radium, because she discovered radium. Okay. So radium, this is how crazy this industry actually is. They actually took radium and then sold it to people as a polisher, liquid cleaner, in a spray, a dust layer, disinfectant, deodorizers, ensured death to flies, mosquitoes, roaches, bed bugs, fleas, hog lice. So it kills insects, very proficient, right, for instance. But Madame Curie, is it? Yeah, I think it is. I can't remember. For some reason, my brain just overloaded, maybe. I don't think I've ever forgot her name, for goodness sakes. I didn't think that was possible. Well, polish and clean furniture, buggies, automobiles, marble, tile, brass, nickel, carpets, rugs, mattings, machinery, typewriters, cash registers, many other things not mentioned. Agents wanted in every town. Okay, bear with me. Radium is restoring health to thousands. No medicine or drugs, just a light, small, comfortable, inexpensive radioactive pad worn on the back by day and over the stomach at night. This is unbelievable genocide, folks. Over 150,000 sold. This was established in 1960. Thousands have written us that it healed them of, and of course, don't believe any of it, because it destroys your health right away. No matter what you try or what your trouble may be, you don't want to get up in the morning and get these pads. You don't want to go to work, put that pad on your stomach and back. This is genocide. So another thing you got to take into consideration is that spray. If you buy antique furniture, you could get a lethal dose because it was polished. If you buy an automobile from the Model Ts and stuff like that back in this era, you could very well, you get in that and get incredible doses. So the industry's entire legacy is predicated upon genocide, omnicide. So the buildings blew up. The reactors were on the 16th, these are the pictures. That's what it would have looked like. So the story that, we only got through one story today, and I apologize, but I wasn't expecting that story to have that many lies in a single story. But when you go back and do the legacy stories, from the original stories, the first couple of weeks and months, that's the kind of stories. So the building looks like this over there. The fuel pools are at the top of the buildings, right? So they gutted the buildings, they built this contraption offsite, brought it in, and started to assemble it. And that's the whole process, right? And you can see the top part of this building is just an empty shell, right? That's it. Here's a bigger picture of it. That's actually empty. Here's another picture. It's empty. The reactor core and the fuel pools were above the building you're seeing that they put there, the structure. And the idea now was to pretend that they're in the building getting the fuel out of the pool. And I played that video for you earlier. But what it is it's just an illusion. You can't build a fuel pool and then have all the fuel. The fuel is clearly gone. That's the official pictures inside of a building that don't exist. November 18, 2013, we started fuel removal from the spent fuel at the Fukushima Daiichi. This is the TEPCO's video.
On November 18th, 2013, TEPCO started...
I'm going to turn it down. Creepy. I'm going to turn it down, just play a little bit of it for you. So look at the pixelation of the bottom of the cast. Now remember, the United States got 70 identical reactors and fuel pools. They're identical in every facet. The colors, everything is identical, except for the writing on the cast would be different, right? And so they took the cast out, and look at it, it's blatantly pixelated there. There's no need to pixelate a label on a canister, right? Unless you're up to no good. This is an old footage. And so they're taking it out, putting it in the cast, and then they lower it down. Let me get to the best part, the fun part. Okay, right there. See that? They're lowering it down onto a truck, they're saying. You can see almost the whole thing is pixelated. Cast is lowered down onto a trailer in the bottom of the building. Well, this is the fucking building. The building, they can't be at the top of the building lowering stuff down to... I'm sorry, that's reactor 3. They can't be at the top of a building. They did do the same thing for reactor 3, by the way, but that was reactor 4 I was showing you. They're claiming at the very top of this, way 140 feet above this building, and that's what all of this stuff is. They're claiming up there, and they're low. This is a great picture where they're lowering it down from 190 feet, 65 meters, 19-story building, down to a special transport truck to bring it over to a spent fuel pool that doesn't exist. And I showed you that evidence earlier. Everything's pixelated. So I got 3 more pictures and then giggity. And I think, like, after the show is over, first off, in the comment section in the description is a contest, anti-nuclear contest video. Not anti-nuclear contest, but an anti-nuclear video that James Lucet has submitted. And that contest ends tomorrow morning, right? Tomorrow's the final, today's the last day. And so if you go and watch that song, rather, and listen to that song, it could help, right? It's an anti-nuclear song. You can get that out there. It's a good song, and he's got a lot of other songs. We're going to play one of them in a moment here, actually. But, so this building is not 100 feet above this building, 140, 150 feet above that stump. And then both of these stumps should have been raised all the way to the ground, but they didn't because they wanted to do this to both of them and then pretend that they were getting fuel out of a pool that clearly doesn't exist. Okay, all right. Let's go over and close down the comment section. Close down the poll. Because I'm actually a little giddy because we just spent over 2 hours. What the hell have we been doing here tonight? 2 hours, 10 minutes to go through a story and challenge each lie. And this is why I don't do that in every story, because you'll never get to stories. Now, tomorrow night we're going to run through. I'm not going to be bringing you this hideous amount of documentation because it's exhausting to put this stuff together. Is journalist and nuclear scientist just another word for serial killer? That's 100% what it is. Prove me wrong. And these are serial killers. What they done is clearly serial killers. So James donated $200, which is great because I have to get a new phone. So I went yesterday evening. I went and ordered the phone in. It's a very cool phone. It's very good for what we're going to do. And it's got a lot of interesting attributes we'll talk about later. But my other phone is just a disaster. Okay, so we made it. Ha ha. And when I get this tired, because that's exhausting to go through a single story and take 2 hours. It's still working. It's exhausting. And I'm just going to delete everything before I call it a night here, because otherwise tomorrow I'll get confused of where I left off. So I'm getting to a habit of just delete everything up to the, and then start with a fresh, clean screen for tomorrow night. Okay, anybody wants to donate, and we need donations, you can donate at the bottom of the description. There's 2 links. And we need to raise money for some more stuff. And that's what we're up to every day anyway. But right now we're working on projects. And I got this, we still got to cover, I'm not even going to get into it tonight, the recent research expeditions. And I just didn't want to try it tonight. I need to, it's an overwhelming job to try to go through it. This is the problem, right? But I want to cover it live, so that we're going to do that. And I also want to put it all up at my site. And that's going to be nuts trying to pull that off, but we'll get there. All right, so I'm going to shut up. We're going to play another song that James Lucid put out. It's a fun song. It's got a great beat to it. And it's about a troll from Japan that has stalked us for over a decade. Brutally, relentlessly, and viciously. And has enacted an operation now against me called Operation Long Jump. And the idea is to destroy my reputation. I think they succeeded. I think they've done an amazing job at killing me. And nothing I can do about it. I just got to stay here and hope the world wakes up. And do the best to educate those who are enlightened enough to come here. Have a great day. Have a great night. And hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody on the next show. The next shoe. Probably tomorrow night. Take care, folks.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale, like a soothing song, says, hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.